In this video, we're going to be going over the top 5 beginner frames in Warframe. I have recently been doing a beginner's guide series, and how can I do a series without recommending Warframes or weapons for beginners? Let us explore my top 5 beginner frames in Warframe. Remember, this is my opinion. For all the veterans or recent baby tenors, if you have a different opinion, please by all means share them with us in the comments below. Hopefully some baby tenors can learn from it. Let's begin. The first frame on the agenda is Volt. Volt is Electric Boy, and he is also a starter frame. There will be quite a big portion of you who already have Volt, but I mentioned him simply for the fact that Volt is an extremely powerful frame and is used for a lot of content later on in the game. He is one of the most versatile frames in Warframe to have. Getting him early would not be a bad idea if you don't have him already, of course. You can obtain Volt via the Tenno Lab in your clan dojo. Just a heads up for this video, pretty much all of the frames on this list except for one will be dojo frames, as they are really good beginner frames and of course pretty easy to obtain. Now you may be asking why. Volt's first ability is Shock. This ability as itself is not that great. However, Volt has an augment. Remember when I mentioned augments, they are basically power-ups for that frame and make them slightly stronger. This augment is called Shock Trooper. If you hold to cast, it will grant all allies and yourself extra electricity damage, and this scales with ability strength. So this is a big damage boost in certain cases and for the super early game in Warframe. His second ability is Speed. This increases you and your allies' movement speed, reload speed, as well as melee attack speed. It is a huge quality of life and is a very good utility skill that boosts your general mission running times and makes you feel like you're gliding through your missions. This ability is affected by strength and movement speed mods. This is my favorite ability for Volt, as when you scale it with strength and movement speed mods, you can get a really fun speed build to zoom through your missions in the star chart. His third ability is Electric Shield. Electric Shield is really handy to use. Place down a shield that blocks all incoming projectiles. However, there is more. You can also pick up the shield and carry it with you. You can only carry one shield at a time, and you can use your weapons while holding the shield, and when you shoot through the shield, you and your allies will gain 50% electricity damage and 200% critical multiplier. So you gain free electricity damage and extra critical damage when shooting through these shields. You can, however, stack your shields up, only up to 6, and the electricity damage bonus will stack up 50% each time, but the crit damage multiplier will not stack. His fourth ability is called Discharge. Discharge makes Volt a nuke, and this is why he's such an important frame to have. He discharges electricity that creates a shockwave that chains between enemies. The more enemies that are in range and are huddled close together, the more damage Discharge will do. This is a very strong ability for nuking rooms in Warframe and honestly super satisfying. It is also worth noting that there is an augment for his fourth ability, which is called Capacitance, which converts a portion of the damage from discharge into shields. It's a really great survivability increase if you feel like you are dying when you progress through the star chart. Volt has a pretty cool passive that charges up electricity damage as he moves for your next shot. This will only go up to 1000 and will only apply to one bullet. And that is Volt's abilities explained to you. Now pause. One moment, my good tenor. Before we get into his builds, I want to quickly explain two things. Firstly, how I'm going to set this video up. I'm going to show 3 tiers of builds for each frame. The first being for those of you who don't have a catalyst or don't have the mod capacity or just don't have good mods yet. So I'm going to show half builds for the first setup. This is also for super early mouse rank players who can work towards getting these mods as a beginner. The second setup is basic mods and maybe one corrupted mod here and there that you can work towards that should work without a former and requires just a catalyst and will be a full setup. The last setup will be a little later into the star chart for those of you that have put 1 or 0 former in and have obtained some corrupted mods. Although some frames I will only show 2 builds as they don't need that much investment. The second thing I want to discuss very quickly is the ranks of mods. A common mistake that beginners do is think they have to fill up all the mod slots, when in reality this is not the best thing to do. It's best to max rank your lower rank mods like Continuity, Flow, Stretch and Intensify, or get them to as high rank as you can. Most of these mods are only rank 5, so the ender cost won't be so big. I will also show corrupted mods for Warframes. However, as a beginner, you will not be able to max these mods out. They are simply too much. They go up to rank 10 and require 20,000 ender plus per max rank. It is way too much for a beginner, but it's just best for you to level them up as much as you possibly can and keep using them, and then as you start building your ender pool, you can keep upgrading them slowly but surely. You will get far more out of having a half build with maxed mods than a full 8 mod build with low rank mods. For Volt's first build, we have a really early game setup. Remember, your aura increases your mod capacity, so you want to make sure that the polarities match. Just use whatever you have available, and if you can, match the polarities to increase your mod capacity. This build uses 38 mod capacity, which means at rank 30, with 30 mod capacity plus an aura that matches the polarity, you will be good to go if you use this exact setup with maxed mods. Although most of you will not have all of these mods maxed out. If none of this made sense to you, I did make a full guide on modding, so if you want to go and check that out so this maybe will make more sense to you, then by all means check the cards on the top right. So we have Flow to increase our energy, Intensify for strength, Vitality for extra HP in the early game, Continuity for duration, and Stretch for range. Try and max out all of these mods except for Vitality. There isn't a need to max it out because as you progress, you won't be using mods like Vitality and Redirection. They will be replaced. Moving on to the second build, we have the exact same except we add Redirection for extra shield, Streamline for efficiency because as a beginner, one of your biggest problems is energy sustain, and then Shock Trooper for that extra electricity damage boost. Just a quick note here, there are two ways to obtain augments. The first way, which is the main way, and that's through syndicates. I have not yet explained syndicates, but for those of you that have maybe progressed a bit and know what they are, you can get augments through syndicates. The alternative way is buying them through other players for platinum. Augments should not cost more than 15-ish platinum per augment depending on the platform. I'm not too sure of the exact prices, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem with you because I have explained how to make platinum as a beginner. The second build is for those of you who have invested in a catalyst into your vault, which is not a bad idea. Then we move on to the third setup. Again, very similar, but here we use Transient Fortitude for extra strength, and then we have Augur Reach, which can be obtained through doing level 30 to 50 Cetus bounties on Earth. Capacitance for survivability, as this will be used in later star chart, and this is geared more towards Vault's fourth ability for a nuke. We have more strength here so that our speed ability is increased. If you want to, you can swap out Capacitance for Shock Trooper, and if you feel that your duration maybe is a bit too low, then swap out Augur Reach for Augur Message, which is also obtained through doing Cetus bounties. When it comes to playing Vault, all you need to do is cast his second ability, so you go zoom zoom, throw down a shield and pick it up, use your weapons to shred through everything. When you get enough energy and there are big groups of enemies, cast Discharge, his fourth ability, which you will then spread your sparkles everywhere and watch as everything dies. If you are using Shock Trooper, remember to hold cast your first ability. And that is Vault done and dusted. Before we go into the next frame, if you could just take a moment to leave a like on this video, my good Tenno, it really helps me. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next frame, and that is Wukong. Like the Monkey King, yes, Wukong is a very good Warframe for early and late game in Warframe. He is super tanky and good for spy missions, and he can be quite speedy actually. He also does some funky melee damage with his fourth ability. He is also a dojo frame, however there is an important thing to note. He requires Nitain Extract to craft him, which can be quite a pain to get. The way you obtain Nitain Extract is through your Nightwave. Remember I mentioned that Nightwave is like Warframe's battle pass in a sense. As you complete daily and weekly tasks, you will progress and gain Nightwave credits. Head over to the cred offerings tabs and you will see Nitain Extract here. This is unfortunately the best way to obtain this resource. There are other ways, but the drop chance is so low it's not worth your time and effort. So get grinding on your Nightwave as soon as possible. Wukong's passive is one of the things that makes Wukong amazing. When you take fatal damage, meaning when you die, Wukong will use one of his mastered techniques. He has 5. But only 3 can be used in a mission. So you will basically have 3 extra lives before you go down. The 5 are Primal Forces, which is 300% elemental damage for 60 seconds, Heavenly Cloak, invisibility for 30 seconds, Cosmic Armor, which is invulnerability for 30 seconds, Monkey Luck, which is enemies that are killed have extra loot, and Sly Alchemy, which is orb drops are 4 times more effective for 60 seconds. Orb drops being health orbs and energy orbs. This is why Wukong is such a forgiving frame, because he basically has 3 lives before he goes down. His first ability is Celestial Twin. Shed yourself into 2, create a twin, and he do big damage. Your twin will use whatever loadout you are using. If you melee, he will use your primary and shoot from a distance. If you use your primary, he will melee, so he will always do the opposite of what you're doing. You can command your twin to kill certain targets, doing extra damage to them. His second ability is Cloud Walker. This is what makes him so great for spy missions and speeding through. Basically, become a cloud that zooms around, and it also cleanses you of status effects and heals you and your twin. Increasing your duration here will help you to stay in the air longer. What's so nice about Cloud Walker is how nice the movement is. You have full control of where you're going, so you could just go here and then you could just go woo all the way around and instantly change direction. Now, another really great thing about Cloudwalker is the fact that it actually makes you invisible. So when Wukong goes into spy missions, all your lasers and everything like that will not be picked up if you use Cloudwalker. This is why Wukong is so amazing for stealth missions as well. It is super satisfying just being a cloud and having full control over everything. His third ability is Defy, which makes you invulnerable for a few seconds, storing the damage taken and then dealing it out in one massive hit. During the invulnerable phase, you get bonus armor given to you relative to the damage stored. However, the bonus armor can only stack up to 1500 additional armor. This is a very nice tanky ability to stop you from dying and giving you some huge armor bonuses. Then you get Primal Fury. Whip out Wukong's giant shtick and unleash hell upon your enemies. Seriously, this staff gets big. It's kind of funny. It's Wukong's Exalted Melee. Exalted weapons are weapons that are tied to certain frames, meaning that they come with the frame and are extra weapons on top of your 3 usual weapons in your loadout. These are usually activated through abilities. You will have to mod Primal Fury like a normal melee. That is Wukong's abilities explained to you. Let's talk about his builds. The first build we have is really easy and super early. Again, whatever aura you have available, and remember to match the polarity, but if you can, use Steel Charge if you have it for that extra melee damage, as it will benefit Wukong's 4th ability, Primal Fury. We then go for the usual, Continuity for duration, Intensify for a bit of strength, Flow for more energy. We go Steel Fiber, as scaling more armor with Wukong's 3rd ability, Defy, will benefit you more than going shields, because Wukong's base shields are just so low, it does not make sense to go redirection and trying to scale the shield. The bonus armor that you will get from D5 plus Steel Fiber will make you very tough to kill when you are zooming around in the early star chart. And then we go Vitality for more health. Very simple early game build to run, and it will be nice to have for that extra damage and more duration for Cloudwalker. The second build is the exact same mods, except we drop Vitality. We go Streamline, Stretch, and then I chose to use Transient Fortitude, but this is only if you have farmed it yet. Then Augur Secrets for more strength. This is a nice damage dealing setup here. The last setup is a countable setup for later star charts, something that you can work towards. Here we focus more on duration, so Wukong's Cloudwalker ability is longer. We do have reduced range here because we don't need that much range on Wukong. With 200% duration, we have a 4-second Cloudwalker, which is honestly really nice for spy missions and capture missions. I suggest Streamline for all noob builds because one of your biggest problem as a noob is energy sustain. Wukong is super tanky with all of these setups. Now, when it comes to actually building his Iron Staff, his Exalted Melee, it's really simple. You can run something like this as an early game setup if you don't have a lot of mods. Alternatively, something like this, which is not a full build, you will require one former. You can go for like a viral heat setup with True Steel. That works too as well. Really simple, and you will do quite fine, especially if you're running the Steel Charge aura. You will do quite a bit of damage in Star Shot with this very simple setup. Now, how do you play Wukong? Well, he's really simple. Cast your Celestial Twin, let him do his thing. If you want to mark enemies that are a bit tougher to kill, by all means go for it. Your twin does 6 times the damage against marked targets. Use Cloudwalker as your movement skill, also as a way of healing yourself and getting out of sticky situations. It is also good for status cleansing as well. So let's say you have heat, slash, or toxin on you and you're about to die, cast Cloudwalker and you'll be good to go. Cast Defy, which is his 3rd ability, periodically to get your armor bonus, and remember to cast it when there are lots of enemies facing you and shooting you so that you can stack up the damage, thus stacking up your armor bonus, pretty much guaranteeing the max 1500 armor bonus. It is also a great oh crap ability when you are about to die. Then if you want some funny melee damage, cast Wukong's 4th ability to smack some enemies with your giant shtick. That is Wukong simplified. Now let's move on to the next frame, which is Zephyr. Bird Girl. Now, Zephyr is also a dojo frame, and she is, for me personally, a very underrated frame that I wish I knew about or paid attention to earlier. Zephyr is a bird frame that projectiles herself into enemies by doing some funny nosedives and floats like a butterfly and stings like a bee. I don't know why I said that, but it kind of makes sense. Her passive makes you feel like there's low gravity. She blocks all projectiles and throws down tornadoes that when you do damage to one tornado, it does damage to all the enemies affected. She is a very fun early game frame that can take you all the way to the end game. Her passive is, like I mentioned, low gravity. You move fast while in the air and you fall slower. You also gain 150% critical chance with weapons while airborne. I will admit sometimes this can be annoying, but it depends on the situation. There is an augment to remove the floating mechanic if you really don't like it. It is called Anchored Glide. Her first ability is Tailwind. This is the funny nosedive ability and is also a movement ability. You can dash forward in rapid succession to move faster through maps. If you bullet jump up and cast Tailwind below you, Zephyr will nosedive, doing impact damage against enemies. The higher you are, the more damage the nosedive will do. You can also jump up, go airborne, and hold to cast Tailwind and suspend yourself. This will drain 5 energy per second. While you are suspended, you can just fire your weapons, cast your abilities, and you can also move around and glide along while this is active. Tailwind is a super fun movement ability that is incredibly versatile and you can do a lot with it. Her second ability is Airburst, a handy little crowd control ability. You can use her second in 2 ways. You can hold cast or you can tap cast. Hold cast sends enemies flying, tap cast pulls enemies in. Personally, I prefer to tap cast this ability as you can group enemies quite nicely and then cast your fourth, which is her tornadoes, which we'll get into shortly. Her third ability is Turbulence, her survivability. This is where Zephyr becomes quite tanky. You create a windshield around yourself and completely block all incoming projectiles. However, you are susceptible to melee damage. So with Zephyr, you always want to be at range or in the air to be almost immune to damage while this ability is active. You are still vulnerable to status effects, knockdowns, and explosions. Then we get Zephyr's fourth ability, which is Tornado. This is Zephyr's bread and butter. There are again 2 ways to cast this ability: tap cast and hold cast. If you tap cast, the tornadoes will move around, scooping up the enemies, and if you hold cast this ability, the tornadoes will stay still and scoop up enemies that come near it. This is of course situational. What makes this ability so amazing is that every enemy affected by the tornadoes take damage when you shoot any one of the tornadoes. So if you shoot the tornado on the left, the enemies that are scooped up on the right will still take damage. Another great thing about tornadoes is the fact that the tornadoes will take the element that you shoot or apply it with. For example, let's say I have heat on my weapon and I shoot the tornado will change the heat and all the enemies scooped up will then take heat damage. The tornadoes will slowly but surely apply heat procs. So my suggestion is, as a beginner, I would suggest modding your weapons for heat if you are using Zephyr. That way you can absolutely melt all of your enemies in the star chart. So you can see why this ability is really amazing and how you can delete big groups of enemies with this ability with a good weapon. Zephyr does require you to have a good or a decent damage dealing weapon for her fourth ability to shine. She is an amazing crowd control frame while dealing big amounts of damage. Let's get into the builds, shall we? For Zephyr, it's a little different to the others. We only have 2 builds here because Zephyr's abilities do not scale that well off of strength. So when it comes to building her, you really only want to focus on duration, efficiency, and range. So for the first config, if you can, get your hands on Aerodynamic. It's a decent aura because Zephyr's aura polarity is Vazarin. This will offer you some damage reduction when airborne. Otherwise, run what you have available. Continuity, stretch, flow, streamline, and then we go vitality because this is an early game setup. The second config is the config you're going to be working towards as you start farming your corrupted mods. Normal mods as the first one, but we have Overextended and Augur Reach. Augur Message, Narrow-Minded for more duration. In this build, we have 253% duration, 130% efficiency, and 199% range. This is a very fun build to run with Zephyr. You pretty much do not need to build anything else for her. You could go more range for the funnies if you want to. Now, how to play Zephyr? It's really simple. Always have your third ability active. You will barely die as long as this ability is up, but just a quick reminder, it does not protect you from melee. Remember that. You can use Tailwind to move around or hover in the air, cast Airburst to pull enemies in, and cast your tornadoes as much as you can if you can sustain the energy, and enjoy deleting groups of enemies with your weapons. Focus mainly on your third ability and your fourth and hover. You will be good to go. That is Zephyr simplified and explained. She is very powerful and she will take you straight to the end game. Moving on to Rhino. I've already mentioned Rhino in previous episodes. You obtain Rhino through doing the assassination mission on Venus called Fossa. Here you will kill the Jackal, a super easy boss fight which I have already explained. Rhino will often be most newer players' first frame after their starter frame. Rhino has insane tanking capabilities while having some decent damage boosts and some good crowd control. You just can't go wrong with this frame. He is absolutely amazing. Rhino's passive is, for lack of a better word, quite useless. Ironic after I've been praising him so much. His passive is just useless. His first ability is Rhino Charge. Leap towards enemies, knocking down everything in your path. You are immune to damage while casting Rhino Charge, and if you cast Rhino Charge in rapid succession, its damage will be multiplied until 4 times, increasing its range and reducing its energy cost by 75% when at 4 times. However, I will be honest with you, it's really only used to move around, but even then it's probably better to just bullet jump, as this ability does really little damage, and the only thing that it has going for it is just sending your enemies flying. It's funny. His second ability is Rhino's Bread and Butter, and that is Iron Skin. This is what makes Rhino Rhino. He covers himself in his skin, insulating himself from all damage and gaining Overguard. Overguard is like another layer of defense in Warframe. Think of it as a shield over your shields. When you cast Iron Skin, you are invulnerable for 3 seconds, and all the damage that is absorbed while you are immune will scale up your total Overguard when the 3 seconds is done. The amount of Overguard you receive scales with the ability strength and armor. It's best to cast this ability while all enemies are focused on you so that you get the most amount of Overguard from it. His third ability is Roar, one of the best damage increasing abilities in Warframe. Now Roar is a tricky one though, and I will try to keep this brief as I do not want to overcomplicate it for you, as you are a beginner watching this, and I still want to make an episode explaining damage fully in Warframe so that it makes sense. What Roar basically does is slightly increase your normal base damage hits, but will multiply your damage over time effects like Slash, Toxin damage, and heat damage. Those 3 status effects are damage over time effects. This is an oversimplified explanation of Roar. I will go more in depth on this ability in the future. What makes Roar so amazing too is that it also increases the damage of your abilities and your allies' abilities, and you can cast it for you and your allies. This makes Rhino a super good frame to have in public lobbies. We move on to Rhino's 4th ability, Rhino Stomp, a super satisfying crowd control ability. Stomp the ground, lifting all the enemies off of their feet and slowing down time. One of my favorite CC abilities in that game, simply for the fact that it just looks really cool and sounds so satisfying. Not much to say about this ability, just really fun and satisfying. Now we move on to his builds. His first build, we're going to run any aura. Then we're going to run steel fiber, because remember, Iron Skin scales off of base armor and strength, continuity for duration for raw, flow for more energy, intensify for more strength scaling for raw and Iron Skin, and then streamline for efficiency. We don't really need vitality or redirection, as you will always have Rhino Skin active and you can just recast it as you run out. His next build is going to be the last one. All the mods are the same, except we add Transient Fortitude, Augur Secrets, and Augur Message. This is for a mid-game setup when you're in the middle of the star chart, moving on to later star chart, and will take you there quite comfortably. This gives us decent strength, a bit of duration, and some efficiency. If you can get your hands on a mod called Armored Agility, then you can swap out Augur Secrets for it. This is a super simple beginner Rhino build. He honestly is so powerful that you don't even need that many mods for him. That's how strong Rhino is. Just know that this is a beginner build for Rhino. How to play him? Really simple. Firstly and always, have your Iron Skin up. Iron Skin must be up at all times. Cast Raw to boost your damage. In my honest opinion, I wouldn't use Rhino Charge, but again, you play the game how you want. Enjoy yeeting your enemies to the sky, by all means, Rhino Charge away. And then we Rhino Stomp every now and then to get some satisfying crowd control. He is a super easy and relaxing frame to play. You're pretty much invulnerable at all times, and as a star chart beginner frame, you just cannot go wrong with Rhino. And that is Rhino simplified. And then we move on to the last frame on the list, and that is Nezha. Nezha is also a dojo frame, and Nezha is a similar but different Rhino. Super tanky, but with more utility in a sense. Nezha has a shield just like Rhino, as well as crowd control abilities that spike enemies and holds them still. He is very easy to play and understand. His passive is very simple. You slide 60% faster and you go 35% further. So you will feel like you're gliding around everywhere if you slide. His first ability is Firewalker. Light your feet on fire and leave a trail behind you, igniting enemies as they walk in the trail or if you walk past them. This in itself is also a crowd control ability, because heat staggers enemies when they are ignited. You can also kill super early enemies with this ability. On top of all of this, it increases Nezha's movement speed. His second ability is Blazing Chakram. Blazing Chakram is quite a handy ability to use when used correctly. You see that little disc on your back, you hurl it straight to your enemies, and every enemy it hits makes them more vulnerable to damage and forces the enemies affected to have a higher chance of dropping orbs on death. This is great for doing big damage to a few targets at once. It also sets them alight. You can charge this ability and amplify its damage. If you throw Blazing Chakram and you tap the ability again, you can then teleport to the ring in midair, and if you have Firewalker active, his first ability, it will create a ring of fire around you when you land. Nezha's third ability is Warding Halo. Warding Halo is very similar to Rhino's Iron Skin, except instead of you having a whole skin, you just get a ring around you that absorbs 90% of all incoming damage. The ring's health also scales off of armor and strength. It has the brief 3 seconds of invulnerability when cast. All damage absorbed will scale the health of the ring around you. You will also be fully immune to status effects and stagger while Warding Halo is active. In theory, you are not as tanky as Rhino in the shield regard, but you do have more utility with Nezha with all the crowd control and heat damage bonuses. Nezha's fourth ability is called Divine Spears, a really cool crowd control ability. Impale nearby enemies on spears that erupt from the ground. You can then reactivate the ability to slam them into the ground, dealing damage. There is also an ability synergy where if you cast Divine Spears and you use Blazing Chakram, Nezha's second ability, on them, it will produce a second Chakram for every enemy hit and will constantly chain after that. A really satisfying ability to crowd control enemies when they start to annoy you. Let's move on to his builds. His first setup, we go for Intensify for strength, Steel Fiber for armor scaling off of Warding Halo, and just general armor. Streamline because Nezha can be quite energy hungry, Flow because we need more energy with him, and Continuity for more duration. His second setup, we go for a more balanced setup. We add Augur Message, Transient Fortitude, and Stretch for more range. This is for a more mid-star chart build. His third build I have not yet completed because it will require one former, and I did not want to confuse you with me adding a polarity, so I will add a mod for you that you can build for when you add the former in. Here you run an augment called Reaping Chakram, which increases the ring's damage by 2 times per enemy hit. We run both Blind Rage and Transient Fortitude. We run Streamline, Continuity, and Flow. Then we run Stretch, and then you can run Augur Message as well, so you have more duration. For later star chart, you can't go wrong with this build. If you find yourself struggling for energy, then you can just drop Blind Rage and run Intensify with Augur Secrets. Just very quickly, I want to add something here. For pretty much all of my builds, they are just suggestions. You do not have to follow them exactly, they are guidelines. The beauty of Warframe is how much freedom you have in your builds. Play around, see what works for you. If you like full strength and don't mind not casting your abilities as much, focus on all strength and go lower efficiency. If you prefer having a little bit of strength and a lot of duration, range, and efficiency so that you can cast your abilities more, then go for that. This is the time in Warframe for you to experiment and get the hang of modding and find out what you like and figure out your playstyle. The sooner you begin to learn how to mod for yourself in Warframe, the better this game will be for you. How to play Nezha? Super simple. Cast your 3, which is Warding Halo. Same thing like Rhino, always keep it up at all times. Just be careful though, it's not full damage mitigation, it's only 90% damage reduction, so you can still die while the shield is active. Cast your 1 and keep it up at all times as well for more movement speed. Cast your second ability for the tougher enemies or just enemies in general, you will get more orb drops and you will deal more damage. Cast your 4 in groups of enemies to CC them, and then when you've casted your 4th, you can throw your second ability to spread the discs everywhere, and then you can do a lot more damage to more enemies. That is Nezha explained, and that is my top 5 beginner frame guide. I hope it all made sense. I am planning on making a top 5 weapons guide and maybe a part 2 of the beginner's frames as well if this video does well. Remember, maxing out your lower rank mods is way better, and remember to dissolve your duplicate mods for Endo. Have fun with the frames, choose whichever one piques your interest, find out what you enjoy, mod your frames to the way that you like, and just have fun. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, my good teneth. I will see you all in the next one.